This episode of News, Games, and More is brought to you by Watch Dogs Legion.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to another episode of News, Games, and More. I'm Sydney Goodman, and I'm here with Jana Garcia.
What's up?
Josh Dew.
Hello.
And Mitchell Saltzman.
Hi.
Howdy, howdy. How? I don't know why I was going to say that. I don't think that's a thing people say. But Mitchell, I'm so happy you're here because we are talking Ghost of Tsushima review. It dropped today. And so if you have questions for Mitchell, go ahead and drop them in the chat, I suppose. And we may or may not get to it. But the game officially comes out on the 17th, which is Friday. And we gave it a 9, which is amazing. And we being Mitchell, stated that Ghost of Tsushima is an excellent action game and its open world is one of the most gorgeous yet. So, Mitchell, let's just start with you. Several people on staff have said that you are the best person to review this game. I, of course, agree. Tell us your background and what with these kinds of games and what makes this one especially stand out in the genre.
I mean, that's very flattering to hear. I think that the reason people are saying that is probably because like action games in general are my favorite style of game. I like breaking down combat systems, and Ghost of Tsushima has a very good combat system. But like in the grand scheme of things, like the open world genre is it's a genre that I've played a lot of. It's not necessarily my favorite genre, but what Ghost of Tsushima does is it brings this really, really good combat system into the open world, action adventure space. And usually a lot of the problems that I have with these open world games is that the combat doesn't really evolve enough to the point where, it can handle a 40-hour game. But Ghost of Tsushima absolutely does do that. And it does that not through traditional level up mechanics, which I think is a big problem with some other games, because you get into this spot where you're literally blocked off from progressing in the story until you bring up your level by doing all these side quests, and then the side quests don't become side quests; they're just less fun main missions that you still have to do. And so Ghost of Tsushima does away with that. You can do anything right from the start. There's obviously a progression of main quests that you have to go through, but you'll never feel like you're out of your depth in an area or in a quest. You'll never get one-shot by an archer. You'll never have to fight against an enemy that takes 5 minutes to bring down. And it's just very refreshing in this genre, I think.
Mm-hmm. That reminds me of like Breath of the Wild, especially like kind of that just jumping into whatever side quests, like no matter what point in the game you're at, like you can just do anything. I love that. Like
for sure. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying I like how you can kind of personalize your own narrative in that way. Like it's not really that much of a linear story, and you can kind of compare your experiences with other people, and they're not necessarily the same. I love that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, Breath of the Wild is such a good comparison. There's a lot of aspects of this game that I think were inspired by Breath of the Wild. The fact that you begin the game and like there's nothing on your mini map, and you just kind of have to go in a direction and explore. And it's all very organic. There are subtle cues in the environment to let you know where objects of interest are, and you're never really guided by anything that takes you out of the game, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, on that note, with the Breath of the Wild comparison, Austin Portney in the YouTube chat asked, what other games would you kind of compare it to? Some people in chat are bringing up Assassin's Creed as well. Like, given your background and what you've played before, what are some other parallels that you can draw to games that people do know? Because we all know before a game comes out, it can be hard to kind of get a sense of what people should expect.
Yeah, I mean, Assassin's Creed is the obvious comparison. There's a lot of Ghost of Tsushima is built on the foundation of an Assassin's Creed game. It's a game that is kind of historical fiction. It's all about exploring this wonderful historic environment, which is feudal Japan. And you're taking quests, you're doing side quests, you're talking to NPCs. So yeah, Assassin's Creed is, first of all, the number one comparison that I would say. Combat wise, I say in the review that's like a witch's brew of the Batman Arkham games, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, the pre Assassin's Creed Origins, Assassin's Creed games, because I feel like Assassin's Creed Origins kind of took the combat in a different direction for that series. And Kurosawa movies, because there's a lot of samurai cliches, let's say, that are definitely embedded in this combat.
And then Janet, you actually also have gotten to play quite a bit of the game. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
I'm a little bit less warm on it than Mitchell is. I think at first it really drew me in. I do agree with Mitchell's comment that it does very naturally guide you. I love the integration of the wind. I think having the birds kind of lead you to points of interest is really smart. It helps kind of emphasize the beauty of the world that you're playing in. But ultimately, it kind of felt a bit like an open world on rails to me. I think it at first kind of presents itself as being very open, but really it's like there's only a few set points of interest and you're very much funneled towards them. So I didn't really feel like I was authentically finding anything myself, which as a guides writer made my job easier. But as a player, I thought was a little bit less compelling. Like if we're making the Breath of the Wild comparison, what I loved about Breath of the Wild is that you really felt like your discoveries were your own. Like you sort of almost pulled one over on the game. You traveled really high and you're like, oh, and they put something here. They were so smart in placing this. They knew that I would go there. While that same thing happening in Ghost is the yellow bird literally guided me there and then I looked at it. Or I was wearing the traveler's attire and my controller vibrated to let me know a collectible was near here. And the collectibles are always kind of in the same kinds of spots. Oh, this one's in one hut. This one's in another hut in a camp a little bit farther away. So I think that is really what kind of made this hit less hard for me personally. That fact that it didn't really feel like something, it felt like a little bit handholdy in that regard. And that kind of took me out of the joy that I normally get from exploration. That being said, I do think it's a pretty even-keeled game in terms of the quests. I had to do a lot of side content and none of the side stuff felt poorly aligned with the main quest. It all felt very well integrated, and I think that is one of the strengths. And the combat is very stylish looking as well.
And then Josh, you have not played it. I want to be mean, but I'm not going to. I was gonna call you a loser, but that felt really aggressive. I just know I was thinking about it, but I didn't say it. But then I ended up saying it anyways. So what exactly do you need this game to do for you to be like, yes, I truly am excited about this game and I'm happy I'm playing it?
That sounded like you were saying, I'm not saying you're a loser, Josh, but
yeah, you know what? Most of the people that work at IGN have not played this game, okay? Contrary to popular belief, everybody on Twitter is like, oh, I'm playing this game. I'm like, you know what? I'm not. And so are a lot of IGN people. What am I looking for in this game? Is that the question?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think coming off The Last of Us 2, I'm really, I guess I'm down for an exploration vibe now because The Last of Us is a lot more linear. And so I'm kind of ready to jump back into an open world vibe. I don't think I played an open world game since Red Dead 2. And Red Dead 2 is just kind of a little too much for me. And I'm also really interested in photo mode, actually. The Last of Us 2 is also the first game that I've actually used photo mode in. And I would I think my first playthrough was 5 hours longer than it probably been, just because I was just opening photo mode constantly and trying to take some really awesome photos. And I keep hearing that Ghost has a really good photo mode, but I'm not sure why. Mitch, could you follow up on that? Because I thought, again, Last of Us is the first time I played around in a photo mode, and I thought it was pretty robust. I thought it was pretty nice, but what makes it better?
So I think the big thing about Ghost of Tsushima's photo, well, there's a couple things. One of the big things is that the world of Tsushima is just so unbelievably gorgeous. There's as far as the eye can see, there's plant life that's growing out and swaying really beautifully in the wind. There's just these really great photo ops of these giant Japanese temples that when they hit the sun just right, it's amazing looking. And you can change the time of day in photo mode as well. So that's really cool. Yeah. And then the other aspect that's awesome is that it doesn't just stop the action. The environment will still move despite you being in photo mode. So there's still wind effects, there's still weather effects, and you can actually customize some of those. You can even add particles that wouldn't normally exist there. You can drop a ton of red leaves. You can put a bunch of crows flying into the just a lot of really cool new touches that I've never seen in a photo mode before that Ghost of Tsushima does, that I think, in addition to all these other things with the world being so beautiful and it having all those other usual photo mode features, that just makes it, incredible.
Cool.
that sounds
So
dope.
let's take a question from chat. Matt asked, "Can you play as Noodles?" Just kidding. Somebody did ask that, but we're not going to answer that question. Sorry, Matt. Connor McAllister though asks, "What does the climbing feel like, and how big of a feature is it in the game overall?" I'll leave that up to Janet or Mitchell if either of you want to tackle that.
Yeah, I can tackle it, and it kind of relates back to what Janet said about maybe the exploration not feeling as fulfilling as Breath of the Wild, because in Breath of the Wild you can climb anything. There's no restriction to where you can go in Breath of the Wild, which I think makes exploration in that game so exciting and leads to that feeling of you went somewhere that it didn't seem like the game was telling you to go to, that you like organically found this cool spot and were rewarded for it. That doesn't happen in Ghost of Tsushima because it doesn't have the Assassin's Creed style of climbing. You can only climb up certain spots that you're meant to climb up. You do get a grappling hook eventually, but again, then you can only grapple up to spots where there's a grapple hook spot. So yeah, I hope that answered the question about how the climbing feels. There's not really much climbing to do in this game.
I do think one thing as far as climbing, it definitely isn't as much of traversing the overall map and outer areas, but you do quite a bit of climbing within camps and things, and that's something I actually did enjoy of the game. You can kind of jump up on rooftops and jump from roof to roof and hut to hut, and I really liked kind of that level of aerial traversal where you can sort of scope out the area and kind of plan your attack. There's this really cool attack / animation that you can do where you can basically execute an assassination from way above. I think you might have to unlock, like you can kind of slowly unlock and build out your skills. So I don't know if that's immediate, but
when you have
kind of chaining, yeah, like kind of chaining those together, I think is where I think we will see some really like stylish and interesting approaches and gameplay clips coming out of this, because you can really start to chain sequences and plan out your attacks. They also have a lot of climbing and mountain traversal in these shrines, because they're often in like high up places and you have to like find a way around. Those are pretty satisfying. Like I thought the platforming felt pretty good, albeit once again it was sort of very much like strategic ledge placement, but I still had a good time going over it as someone that just likes platforming and traversing, and I think like kind of combining and swinging with your like what would be a hook shot, what would that be called, the little like
the grapple
your
hook?
hook shot or whatever, the grapple hook, thank you. I'm like, what's the name for it though? Grappling kind of around the areas as well. Like I said, I think it's a little bit more exciting when you're just totally doing it on your own during combat, but even doing it to get to like shrines or areas was pretty satisfying as well.
Yeah, and this is a Sucker Punch game, and it, when you look at it and when you play the combat, it doesn't really feel like a Sucker Punch game. But once you start getting into the platforming challenges and you start, hopping from spire to spire and walking across tight ropes, you can definitely feel that this is made by the same people who did Sly, who did Infamous, et cetera, et cetera.
Now, this is a big question to end on and say that we'll quickly give our thoughts on it. But WVU fan 17 on IGN said another month, another Game of the Year candidate from PlayStation. Nothing new. So sorry, Josh, because you haven't played it. But
It's fine.
Janet and Mitchell, is this a Game of the Year contender for
Josh,
you
come
guys?
back.
I'll start with you, Janet. Is this a Game of the Year contender for you?
No. Mainly because I already have my main Game of the Year frontrunner, which is The Last of Us 2. I just didn't feel strongly enough about Ghost for it to be my Game of the Year or the best game I thought I played this year. So that's just my short answer. That's why it's not that, but I do think I'll consider it for other categories. Like in addition to Game of the Year, we also have these other notable awards, and it'll definitely be on my radar for some of maybe a genre category, but it won't take Game of the Year so far. I'm just still waiting to see if Cyberpunk or any of the other big games coming out can dethrone The Last of Us 2 for me.
All right. Well, okay. So, Josh, is this on your Game of the Year radar? And if not, or if it is, what does it have to do to claim the spot?
I mean, I think an overall like solid open world gameplay experience, like, and I'm excited to see the combat stuff. I wish, we had time to talk about that a little bit more. I think tying all those things together to make this really cohesive, strong narrative, open world, strong combat gameplay focused thing might take the spot for me, just because my front runner is the same as Janet's right now. And the only thing I have really against that game is kind of the pacing and length. But, Ghost is an open world game. I'm already anticipating a lengthier playthrough.
Right on. And Mitchell, is this your Game of the Year?
I think it's definitely a contender. There's a lot of really good games this year. I know 2020 is a trash fire, but there's been a lot of games that I've really enjoyed playing this year. Doom Eternal is probably the front runner for me. Neo 2, which I reviewed also, and really enjoyed. Ghost of Tsushima. I probably would put this ahead of Last of Us Part 2, just because I was really soured by the end of Last of Us Part 2. Even though that game does so many things that are amazing. Also, I'm a coward, and some of those parts were really scary and too dark. And the stalkers, gave me nightmares.
Dude, stalkers suck.
And so, those weren't like, great experiences, but overall, I really like Last of Us 2. I was just mostly soured by the end.
Got it. I almost said copy, which is like the most inhuman way to connect with somebody. Copy it. Oh, thank you. Okay, so
same what normal people would say.
same. No, Mitchell and I have definitely connected over our self-perceived wimpiness.
Yep.
So I
we both read Wikipedia entries of horror movies that we are interested in.
Same.
There's three of us. Janet, would you like to join the club?
I'm gonna have to pass on that aspect, but because I think I like to maintain the illusion that one day I will watch these films. But
okay,
you gotta learn enough.
You'll get there. And
I know myself enough that I'll never watch.
Yeah, just let us know. But speaking of Wikipedia, if you look up Lego on Wikipedia, there's probably a really long article. And Lego announced the Lego NES, which is a replica of the 1985 classic console that also includes a buildable 1980s retro TV that features an 8-bit Mario on a scrolling screen recreation of a Super Mario Brothers level. I am astounded. It is a 2,646 piece set, and it comes out August 1st of this year, and it costs a cool $229.99. Goodness, I forget how expensive Legos are. Let's see. Let's start with you, Josh. Are you gonna get this bad boy? Is it piquing your interest?
Probably not. I'm not like that old. I don't really have a lot of nostalgia for the NES. I gotta be real. Like, I remember when the what was it? The NES Lite? Did that come out?
Mini NES? Oh, NES.
Yeah.
NES.
Mini NES.
The real name was just as ridiculous. I think the official name is like something else, actually, but people know what you're talking about.
Yeah, they know what I'm talking about, and they know now that
It was called the original the NES Classic Edition was what it was called.
Classic. That was it. The NES Classic. Yeah, I mean, I don't have nostalgia for that really. My first like video game memory is probably either N64 or PS1. So I mean, if I wasn't interested in the classic, I don't think I'd be interested in the Lego version of this either.
Let's see, Mitchell, are you excited? Does it bring back good memories? Are you a Lego guy?
Well, I am old enough to have nostalgic feelings for the NES, but I am not a big Lego guy. So I think this looks awesome. And if this was a thing when I was a kid, I would probably be a Lego guy because, I love games, and I would love to just, be able to make a little Mario 1-1 that moves when I crank the TV. But yeah, this is too expensive for my blood.
Janet, are you going to be carrying the torch out of the four of us to create your Lego NES replica?
God, I'm so bad at making these things, but I feel like I might. I'm definitely going to try to get one and see if I end up just getting one, and we'll kind of see from there. Because I feel like it is gonna sell out and maybe never come back because it's a Nintendo product. But I don't have nostalgia for the NES, and honestly, I think a lot of those games are trash. But that being said, I bought the mini NES, and I want this thing. To me, the NES, it's more than just. It's gonna sound very hippy dippy, but it's more than just the games that are on that console. It's like a representation of the beginnings and the origins of Nintendo. And as a huge Nintendo fan, as someone that loves Mario, 1-1's so classic. I just really want this thing. It looks really cool. I think it's a very unique use of Legos as well, or Lego, because the plural is still the same. I never would have thought, Legai, yeah, as they say. I never would have thought that you could even make this with Lego. Granted, I'm not like deep in Lego culture, but the fact that you can crank it, like I want to crank it. Like I want to get it and I want to crank it. It's like a retro version of the Playdate that's supposed to come out, that small handheld console with the crank. I just find it so compelling and cute. I do think it's a little weird that I feel like the scale is off. Like I didn't have an original NES, but Mitchell, the NES size compared to that TV, like what's going on? What's going on there? Like,
I mean, I don't think it's to scale.
right?
I
Like
think
the
if it
NES
were
are
to sale,
almost
it'd be
the
like
size of the
$500.
TV.
Yeah.
Or it's like maybe it's that's like the world's smallest TV. Like, did someone have that sad hookup where the TV was the size of like a hand radio? That's the only thing that's a little bit odd about it, because you'd imagine that one of those things might be differently sized. I get it not being to scale, but I don't know. It just, they sitting next to each other, they look a little bit odd. But that aside, I think it's a really cool collectible. It is super expensive though, and with next gen coming out, I'm like, that's probably almost half of a next gen console that actually plays games.
I hope
So
it's half.
I know, I hope it's half too. But
Fingers
It's only a
crossed.
quarter. That'd be an issue.
well, then I was gonna
God.
have to figure it out anyway. So I want the stupid Lego thing.
All right. Well, I'm happy. You'll have to post pictures and report back if you do get your hands on it. So next up, we're going to be talking about the Xbox Series X Velocity architecture. But before we do that, let's say bye to Mitchell because he's leaving us.
You're
Bye,
kicking
Mitchell.
me off the show.
But thanks for your insight. We so appreciated it, and your review was wonderful.
Well, thank you. That makes it feel a little bit better.
And I didn't call you a loser. I called Josh a loser. So
That's true.
it's a win for you. But okay, so thank you again, Mitchell. And the Xbox Series X Velocity architecture, basically that should mean smaller. New. But we have Bo. Hi, Bo.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being on. So you actually conducted the interview with Jason, correct?
That is correct.
So that means you are the mastermind. Well, and you're our tech editor, so you know a lot of techie things, which is great because we're talking about tech.
Yeah.
So can you kind of just break down what exactly velocity architecture is for all of us who don't understand?
I'm going to do it to the best of my ability because a lot of it is admittedly over my head as well. But the long and short of it is the velocity architecture is what's going to make games load a lot faster on the Series X. So the core of it is the new SSD. This is the first time that we're going to be seeing SSDs in the consoles. The current gen consoles don't have SSDs. It's much faster for load times. There's also a bunch of other really complicated things: hardware accelerated decompression, direct storage API, something called sampler feedback streaming. A lot of these are really technical terms that I can sort of talk about. But yeah, it's the long and short of it is just that the games are going to load a lot faster, and that's going to be really great for gamers.
So, okay, I am going to play a little bit of the skeptic here. I am very excited for the next generation, and I definitely believe the marketing when it says that it's going to be less loading times, virtually no loading times, etc., etc. However, I have been around for a few console generations in my time, and I feel like that is something that's promised like every single generation. Is there usually this robust of technology to like back up those claims, or is this something like, Bo, do you think that this means we're actually not going to have loading times and the file sizes are actually going to be small?
Yeah, so we really are seeing an actual generation jump here, and I don't mean that just because of not just saying like we're going from one console generation to the next, but the move from hard drives, HDDs, to SSDs, solid state drives, really is a change in uh, storage architecture, so to speak, and it's an order of magnitude different. Hard drives have improved over the years. They've gone from, I don't know how slow super old school hard drives were, but this was drives were transferring a matter of megabytes per second, up to, I don't want to get my numbers wrong now, but basically the fastest hard drives are at like 100 to 500. No, that's not right. That's what SSDs are. Is in the basically you're going from like under 100 megs per second up to 500 for the slowest of SSDs, and the ones that we're looking at here on the next gen consoles are actually NVMe SSDs, which are even faster than an even step further, and so you're looking at gigabytes per second basically.
Jeez.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, you're saying like it gets like, I don't know, like say 7 times faster, right? If we had to put a numerical value on it, but like, what's not to say these games are getting 7 times bigger? You know what I mean? Just because it is moving faster, technically, doesn't mean the things that it's moving are like the same size as before, right?
For sure. Yeah. That's been a big question for me as well, because yeah, the game install sizes are getting absolutely huge. And just because the game install size, that doesn't mean that everything is going to be loaded at once, but for sure games are a lot bigger than they have been in the past. Because that's things like all the textures that are being loaded in, the assets are a lot higher resolution. Like if games are going to be being played at 4K, like they need to have higher resolution textures in the game so that they don't look muddy when they're played at those higher resolutions on your TV or monitor. Having said all that, that's one of the things that that we talked about with the velocity architecture, and is that there's all these other things kind of coming into play. So, for example, sampler feedback streaming. The way Jason Ronald broke it for me is that when you're loading in textures for a game, I was just saying that these textures have to be pretty high resolution. Especially if you're like up close looking at something right in front of you, it needs to be really high resolution. But the trees way off in the background, something like that, don't necessarily. Well, right now, they still have to load those high res textures, even if you're not looking right at it and it's right in front of you. So the sampler feedback streaming lets developers basically, well, I don't exactly know how much implementation needs to be done by the developers versus on the hardware side, but effectively what it's doing is when those textures aren't needed in their highest resolution, when they don't need to be super high def, they can be lower resolution and thus not take up as much storage and not need to be streamed in quite as high quality, and thus so while the overall game install size might be bigger, what's being needed to be loaded in at that time isn't necessarily going to be quite as much. Those sizes may actually be getting smaller, so we will have an increase in speed as well as an increase in efficiency.
Got it.
Mm-hmm. Now,
Makes
Janet,
sense.
I feel like I really enjoy your opinion on these things, because I don't know if we can cuss here, but you're pretty like no BS. How do you feel about this? Do you feel, is this swaying you? Do you feel like you believe kind of the hype of this tech, I'm like the question that Josh posed in terms of like, okay, this tech is really great, but is the complication of the actual games going to really, as consumers, are we going to see a difference? How are you feeling?
I think we will see a difference, but I think it'll take a while for us to see a difference. Kind of goes back to one of our editors, Tom Marks, did a piece about kind of tempering your expectations for what next gen games look like. And I think this kind of relates back to, I had looked at Bo's video, which you can check out that interview on IGN.com or on YouTube.com. And he had asked directly, is this like an instant, it's all better, or is this like a development thing? And the answer was sort of mixed. Like some elements were said to be an instantaneous improvement, the same way how you playing a game on the Xbox One X looks better than playing it on the One S or a standard one. But things like developers taking advantage of the direct storage API, that requires them to actually make the decision on what they're assigning and prioritizing in terms of IO and how those things load in. That being said, it seems like it'll take a while to take advantage of that specific element. And so I don't think it's going to be completely mind-blowing off the bat. And I think even as someone that plays console a lot, when I see a PC game or a game running on PC, I can definitely tell that it's more beautiful and that it runs a little bit smoother, but it doesn't feel like we're playing two completely different games. Like Assassin's Creed Odyssey looks really good on console, and it does look better on PC, but it still looks really good on console. So I think that whole idea of that conversation of, will this jump be as big as 2D to 3D? I don't think it'll be that wild, but hopefully it'll be something that we feel more in the gameplay elements rather than just the visuals. Because I think that's really what's going to be like a little bit more of a change. Like, I'm so tired of slowly going through corridors. That's what I'm excited about, and how this might free up developers to get more creative in how they design levels. Like, that's what excites me. But I don't think that's something that we'll be able to notice immediately.
Mm-hmm. Now we're coming up to the end of the show, but before we completely sign off, we have Tsushima, I think. I'm so sorry if I just said your name completely incorrect, but said, I'm not going to lie to you folks. You know I love Sony and Nintendo, but I got to hand it to MS. This console is going to be an absolute monster. I think I'm getting swayed into buying one. I only hope MS comes out with new IPs that are incredibly polished and fun. Now, Bo, your job is to distill jargon and make it more meaningful to our readers. Clearly, Microsoft's plan of unveiling and focusing on hardware is working on Kami. Do you think that the majority of Microsoft's focus on hardware is going over players' heads and are ultimately making the console less enticing than the PS5, since Sony has leaned more on software and model options?
You know, it's hard to say how the entire market is responding to this. Microsoft has had their approach of going for sure hard in on the specs and not showing as much on the games yet. Of course, next week we have the first party game showcase, so by then, you know, it's not like there's not going to be a bunch of games on the Series X. There will be plenty, and you know, once we see all of those, then we'll be able to actually compare the lineups and say, you know, this is what you're going to be able to play on Series X, and this is what you'll be able to play on PS5, and gamers will be able to make their decisions then. But as far as the going in on the technical aspects, like, let's not forget that Sony has kind of done that too. Like, they did an entire the PS5 reveal was like a 2-hour technical deep dive with Mark Cerny, and that definitely had a lot of technical jargon with the way that they're doing 3D audio implementation, and they, you know, let's not forget they also do have an SSD, which they're claiming is the world's fastest SSD for gaming and all sorts of things. So there's definitely a lot of those technical aspects too, and we'll see. You know, from my perspective, I just have to wait until I can have both of these consoles in hand and can run games side by side and really actually see how are they performing better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how could we forget that very exciting presentation that Sony did at like GDC or whatever, you know what I'm talking about. Janet, how are you feeling about the discrepancy between the two approaches?
I do think that Sony ended up being more exciting for me as a player. For a long time, Sony silence made it really hard to be excited unless you just love Sony enough to just go with it, which admittedly I'm going to get both consoles anyway, so I don't really have a horse in the race in that regard. But they just totally blew it out of the water with their last presentation, and I know a lot of people criticize that presentation for being not as exclusive heavy as it kind of is made to seem, because some of those games are third-party games that are just going to be playable on everything, but perception is everything. So being able to still have those games on the stage and highlight them in alignment with PS5 and be part of that like hype cycle is still something that gets players excited and definitely had me enticed. And then they also combine that with the reveal of the console. I'm really hoping that Microsoft really comes with it for their presentation and gives specific games to be excited about. Like, I would love to leave with that same feeling. It's kind of wild how Sony just, you know, they remind me of that kid who turned in their assignment last minute or late, but it's so good that you technically have to give them a good grade because they did all the work. But it's like, oh, but you didn't do the rough draft and you didn't turn in any of the other things, and you're kind of trash, but like you did it and you did it really well. And then the other kids are like, this is BS. But I'm like, hey, that was the assignment. And that's basically where Microsoft and Sony are right now. So I'm really hoping that Microsoft can pull ahead or at least make it more competitive, because Sony had a really strong presentation and they have a lot of those things that Microsoft is lacking, at least according to just a general gamer who is looking at both of them as an option.
I appreciate that analogy. I also appreciate, oh, that didn't work the way that I intended. I appreciate those cat. But Josh, how are you feeling about the two kind of unrolling of the consoles? Is one swaying you one way or the other?
I mean, yeah, I for me, I'm like games like priority more than anything, you know. And Xbox hasn't yet shown any games that have really impressed me. Sony is doing really well on that front, and I mean, it goes to show, even on today's show, talking about the best games of the year, and like Last of Us 2 and Ghost, they're both, you know, Sony. Like, so they're doing really, really well on that front. The fact that Xbox is focusing so much on specs, and it seems like they're trying to be this bridging of the gap between console gamers and PC gamers, is really interesting to me. I don't know if it'll work out for them. Those two camps seem very like separated, and they're fine. Like, there need to be a merging of those two camps, basically. But Xbox is giving it a shot. I'm interested to see if it works out for them. Yeah.
All right. Well, time will tell, because they need to give us more info sometime. And then Xbox has their showcase this Is it Sunday or Saturday? Not this week. The next week.
Thursday, I think.
Thursday. I don't have it off the top
I
of my
mean,
head.
what is
You guys-
time? Who knows?
You all know how to use Google. Look it up. It's coming up soon. But thank you so much to Mitchell, who's no longer here, but for his comments on his review. Both, thank you for joining us. Josh and Janet, pleasure as always. And don't forget, news, games, and more. We will be back tomorrow at the same time, 4 p.m. Pacific. I'm Cindy Goodman. Thanks for watching.